Time to return to the further.
One, two, three!
Hey everyone, it's Don J. Corleone here, and I'm here with episode 10 of my Halloween Horror Movie Review Season 3. And for this episode, we're going to be going back right into the 2010s. And for this one, it's going to be for a sequel. And it's a sequel to the very film that I kickstarted this season off with. And this film is going to be 2013's the second installment of this franchise, Insidious Chapter 2. And before I get into details, what's the plot of this? Well, continuing where Chapter 1 left off, Renee is interrogated by a police detective about the supernatural events in the house. While the police investigate the house, the Lambert family temporarily moves to the old house of Lorraine Lambert. Renee is haunted by a woman in white, and Josh has a strange behavior at home. Meanwhile, Lorraine seeks out Elise's partner, Specs and Tucker, expecting to find answers. So how was this film made? Well, obviously after the financial success of the first film in April 2011, discussions for a sequel soon followed, with producer Jason Blum insisting on the return of director James Wan and screenwriter Leigh Whannell. A treatment script did not arrive until nearly a year later. As long as there was a chance that James and Leigh were going to write the second movie and direct the second movie, he didn't want to do it with somebody else, he said. They kept saying that they might do it, they might not do it, which was why there was quite a bit of time between the two movies. And in February 2nd, 2012, it was announced that director James Wan and screenwriter Leigh Whannell were in talks to return for the sequel. And while they were promoting The Conjuring, which also came out the same year, at New York Comic Con in October 2012, Wan described how he and Whannell were working closely on developing the story and the script for the follow-up to Insidious. He explained that he thinks the sequel to Insidious was kind of his reaction to Saw, where, for his own reason, he wasn't as involved in the sequels. So he felt that with Insidious, it would be good to shepherd it and keep it more on track to the version he had when he made the first film, and that it doesn't detour too far. Because we remember how the Saw sequels detoured straight into torture porn, the later ones after 3 anyways, which was something James Wan did not want the first Saw film to be when he directed it. Ever. And the film was titled Insidious Chapter 2 because it was going to be a direct continuation of the first installment, but the tone of the film was going to be more grounded than the first film, with Wan citing his work on The Conjuring as an influence of how he and Whannell approached Insidious 2. He had pulled things from Insidious that applied to The Conjuring, and what he learned from The Conjuring applied to Insidious 2. So for him, it felt like a cumulative filmmaking experience that he had gathered over the years. So after the movie was shot and marketed, the film would go on to be released in Friday, September 13th, Friday the 13th, 2013. One of the most dreaded years for movies ever. To mixed reviews from critics, but that did not stop it from being an even bigger hit at the box office with over $161 million worldwide on a budget of only $5 million. And then, of course, after this, there would be some more films, but they would not be a direct sequel to this movie. They would instead be prequels, with first titled Insidious Chapter 3, released in June 2015, and then Insidious The Last Key, January 2018. But this storyline will now be getting its direct sequel, with Insidious Fear the Dark next year, in 2023. Now, as for my reaction, well guys, believe it or not, this was the very first horror movie I saw in the theater back when I was in 10th grade. And I know some people seem to really hate this sequel, but this is going to be a controversial opinion. I'm not one of the people who hates this. No, I prefer this personally over the first film, and I think it's very underrated. I like that it at least resolved the terrible ending of the first film. which was one of my top bad qualities with the first one. The opening scene explains some more information of Josh's origins with the afterlife when he was a child, and things start to make more sense as the film goes along. The origins of the Black Veiled Bride are explained, and you start to feel that the family is in danger as they try to solve this mystery to stop the haunting for good. The film's scares are decently effective, not as effective as the first ones. The film has a haunted house feel to it, which is an aspect I love about this franchise. There are a few cheap jump scares, but the scares are mostly due to the intensity of the story. The tone of Insidious 2 is very different from the first one. The first Insidious, while successful, took time to ease you into the story, while Insidious 2 got right in your face from the get-go. The first Insidious was more about the family and the quest to get their son back. Insidious 2 is more about the afterlife and the origins behind the reasoning of the haunting. And as things start to unravel, you feel more on the edge of your seat, and you really start to feel that everybody's really in danger. And that's where I'll leave my recap, and I was to reiterate that I love the first one. It was one of the first horror movies I saw when I was getting introduced to horror. This one, on the other hand, had some pretty big shoes to fill. What works is that they took what the original did and expanded on it. It ties in things that happened in the first and shows you more of it, which I thought was good, and this one gives us more information on what happened to Patrick Wilson's character as a boy, and it explains what is happening to him now. And this will be where I want to delve a bit deeper first. We get to see what Elise says in the beginning, where she shows up in the previous movie. Josh, of course, doesn't remember as the memories were repressed to help him. And we see that this Brian Black from that first movie wanted to take him over back then, and we get to learn why. Things really start to come back as this movie went on, and it makes it horrific. Alright, sorry guys. And I also really like how they incorporate this other ghost that is attacking Renee Kelly. The investigation here works, but there is a time when they go to a hospital that Lorraine worked at, and there are still medical records there, but this wouldn't happen, and they still really wouldn't be there, but it doesn't ruin the movie, but it does serve as kind of an issue. To shift the gears here, this movie does something with time that I'm a bit of a sucker for. While in the further, time doesn't move linear and is more of a flat circle. We are able to see events from when Josh was a kid and the truth of what he said as well as who he was talking to. We also get to see a different side of events in the first movie. Some of this really works, where other parts I think are just to establish things, but it's still interesting. The audacity to change the approach of the fighting figure was one of Juan Manuel's best choices, because to reprise the cliches of the first one would be suicide for the work, like a lot of sequels do. In place of the various spirits that haunt the Lambert family in the first one, in Cities Chapter 2, the narrative focuses on the main one of the ghosts we saw in the previous one, the Bride in Black. She's the one who has chased Josh since he was a child, and in this episode, we know her past and her reasons. The atmosphere of suspense is more palpable, although scares are relegated at various times, but Juan no longer uses his addiction to harness a spooky scene to a deafening sound effect. This cheap trick, even though it is still used by the director, seems to be saved here, which is not without subtlety. It's surprising how complete they both managed to carry on some modifications. While Insidious is a film about paranormality and childhood traumas, but focuses on hauntings, Chapter 2 keeps the skeleton of the story and adds the serial killer factor in an invention that was clearly not thought of in primordial idea, but which is balanced enough to not to sound false, and it fits perfectly. And Juan's camera is prodigal in increasing the script of the suspense. His every move is meticulously thought out. The close-ups and details are punctual, and together with the soundtrack, they help the audience to immerse themselves in the fearsome story. Composer Joseph Bissara gets it right again. Most of the scares are blamed for the soundtrack, but the tension is not falsely created. And also noteworthy is the good and moderate use of handheld cameras, and deepening into the killer's psyche is very well crafted. His approach goes beyond smoking environments and cliche classifications linked to childhood abuse. Such things are even shown, but at no time is the villain portrayed as an innocent victim of abuse and not responsible for their actions. The mashup of the first chapter explains well many of the scares arising from it, but it does not treat the viewer as an imbecile either, while it is not unexplained for those who did not watch the original. And now when it comes to the cast. Patrick Wilson has an interesting challenge here. With a double role appropriately harnessed by the actor, who alternates between a devoted family man and something quite different. Then you got Rose Byrne on the other hand. In this one, she has little to do but pay homage to Wendy Torrance from The Shining. and some supporting characters such as Elise, also medium Carl, and Josh's mother Lorraine, even with somewhat forced performances, help the plot move forward, but the nerd investigators of the occult, who are played by Angus Sampson and the series creator himself, Leigh Whannell, end up left over in the narrative as unnecessary distractions, mere misplaced and unnecessary comic reliefs, really. Like, that's kind of all they are. All those Specs and Tucker really were in this movie. They just kind of feel more like comic reliefs this time around. And in Chapter 1, they kind of feel a bit more They were kind of much more useful in Chapter 1 and Chapter 3 stuff. I haven't seen The Last Key, guys, so I can't say anything about it. But in Chapter 2, they just kind of feel like comic. They just kind of feel like comic reliefs. So, and speaking of that part, we get into what is, well, the bad qualities now. Because while this movie is a minor improvement over the first one, I still have some bad qualities with the film. For example, the first half of the film is a little slow paced, but as the story progresses, more questions get answered, which explains some of the missing links to the random occurrences that happened in the first chapter, and all these tie in quite nicely to the story as a whole. Which is nice, but also kind of feels a little confusing. My other annoyance here would be like, I feel like some parts of the story aren't told with enough clarity. While the basic plot is simple enough to recognize, the time traveling aspect in the further was murky to fully appreciate, and I truly think they could have used a character like Elise to acknowledge some of the finer details and give us some type of established ground rules to make it easier for us to understand her in her brief minor appearance near the end of the movie. And then of course we have the jump scares. The jump scares felt pretty effective in the first one, but here I feel like the jump scares this time around feel more like just like loud noises, like in every cheap horror movie, instead of the well built up ones in the first one. But that's just me anyways. But does this mean but the bad qualities do not make me hate this movie. And once again, I'm one of the few people that still likes the sequel, and I think it's underrated in them. And I feel like if this were the last installment chronologically anyways, because Chapter 3 I still like, then this would be a pretty good send-off to the series. But no. We need to make a fifth one next year that's going to be a direct sequel to this. We're probably going to undo the happy ending of this one again. Like, this series should have only been Chapter 1, Chapter 2, and Chapter 3. Because in a chronological order, 3, 1, and 2 serve as a pretty good trilogy. Right there, and a pretty good story arc for Elise. And I have not seen The Last Key. From what I've heard, it's not very good. But I'm probably going to have to watch it next year to get ready to review The Last Key. So, but yeah, despite the bad qualities, I still find Insidious Chapter 2 to be a horror sequel that's even better than the first film, and it's worth the watch if you want to see the first film's ending get fixed. Anyway, that's it for my review of Insidious Chapter 2, and if you're wondering how I'm going to rank Insidious Chapter 2, here's how I'm going to rank this movie. So overall, if you did enjoy the first film but want to see more, then I would easily watch this and then buy it add to your collection for sure, and if you're wondering how I'm going to rank Insidious 2, I'm going to give Insidious 2 an 8 out of 10. There we go. That wraps up Insidious Chapter 2. So you're all wondering, what is going to be the next episode? Well, the next episode we're going to the last year of the 2000s decade. And this is going to be for a stop motion film. And I'm going to leave you guys guessing this one. It's from 2009. It's from the same guy who directed The Night Before Christmas and was the debut of Leica. Yeah, that film's next. So anyway, that'll be it for this episode. Thank you all for watching, and if you like this and want to see more, and don't forget to like, subscribe to Don G. Corleone.